Welcome to AI Podcast. Today we'll discuss the most important current affairs from the Hindu 20 May 2026 edition with detailed analysis for UPSC aspirants.
Yeah, we have got a really packed deep dive for you today, so definitely grab your notebooks.
You can access today's notes from the description box below. Your comments and feedback help us improve and create better content for aspirants every day. Thank you for supporting AI Podcast.
Absolutely. And, today we are taking a really fascinating route through the news.
Yeah, because, well, what if I told you that a violent clash in Central Africa or like a shipping delay at a tiny geographical bottleneck in the Red Sea, that those are the exact reasons your local petrol pump just hiked its prices?
Right. Or why farmers across India are suddenly, scrambling to find fertilizer.
Exactly. Today's mission is all about connecting those dots for you. We are going to explore a really clear narrative, starting with some intense constitutional battles over fundamental rights right here in India.
And then expanding outward.
Right. Expanding into India's evolving global diplomacy, and
Yeah.
then finally exploring the actual physical oceans and choke points that basically hold the global economy together.
It's a journey from the very abstract text of the Constitution to the extremely tangible realities of global trade.
Hmm.
And if there is a central theme to unpack today for your GS exams, it is the Doctrine of Proportionality.
Hmm.
We are looking closely at how the Indian state balances competing interests, weighing individual liberty against national security or economic development against environmental risk.
Okay, let's unpack this, because there is a massive fundamental tension playing out in the Supreme Court right now.
Yeah, there really is.
We are seeing a fierce debate over the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA. Specifically, it's about how bail is granted. We have these two conflicting judgments from coordinate benches, and they strike right at the heart of Article 21.
Right, the right to life and personal liberty.
Exactly. So on one side, you have Justice Ujjal Puyan, who recently rooted his ruling directly in Article 21. He explicitly stated that bail is the rule, jail is an exception, even in terrorizing cases.
Yeah, and his argument is that prolonged incarceration without a trial, it basically hollows out those fundamental rights.
Yeah.
He leaned heavily on a 2021 precedent, the K. Najib case.
Okay, and what was the core philosophy there?
The philosophy is that you simply cannot use the pretrial process itself as the punishment. But, this perspective faces massive institutional pushback.
Right, because the Delhi police, represented by Additional Solicitor General S.V. Raju, they came in with a completely different, much more mechanical interpretation of the law.
Yeah, the ASG argued that under Section 43D5 of the UAPA, the presumption of innocence basically takes a backseat.
A backseat. I mean, I really want to understand the mechanics of this. How does a single clause in a statute force a judge to just deny bail, even if they are worried about prolonged detention?
Well, it essentially comes down to reversing the standard burden of proof. So in a normal criminal case, as you know, the state has to prove you are guilty.
Right. Innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. But Section 43D5 uses the mandatory word shall. It dictates that a court shall not grant bail if there are reasonable grounds for believing the accusation is prima facie true.
Wow. So mechanically, it forces the accused to prove, before a trial even starts, that they are highly unlikely to be guilty.
Right, just to secure their freedom. It creates this rigid statutory wall that severely restricts judicial discretion.
But see, here is where it gets really interesting. That exact same constitutional pillar, Article 21, is currently being tested in a completely different arena.
Oh, you're talking about the corporate and environmental law side.
Yes, there is a new Supreme Court challenge against the SHANTI Act of 2025.
Right, the Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India Act. Quite a mouthful.
It really is. But it's this massive piece of legislation allowing private and foreign corporations to operate nuclear power plants in India.
Mm-hmm. But the controversy, which was brought forward by a retired bureaucrat, it centers on a provision that caps the corporate liability for these foreign operators at a mere 4,000 crore rupees if there is a nuclear accident.
Which, in the context of a nuclear disaster, is, well, it's very low.
It's like establishing a new speed limit, but telling a specific fleet of hazardous chemical trucks they won't have to pay the full fine if they crash.
That is a great analogy.
But let me push back a bit here on behalf of the state. Don't we absolutely need these liability caps to attract foreign investment for our energy grid? Chief Justice Surya Kant even challenged the petitioner to name a single country that manages its massive energy needs without heavily relying on nuclear plants.
Well, and that is the classic development versus safety dilemma, right? It's a staple for any UPSC aspirant analyzing governance. But what's fascinating here is how the petitioners are invoking Article 21.
The right to a safe environment.
Exactly. If we look at historical legal precedents, specifically the landmark 1986 oleum gas leak case, the Supreme Court established the principle of absolute liability. Okay, remind me how that works.
The logic was revolutionary at the time. It said that the larger and more prosperous an enterprise carrying out hazardous activities is, the greater their liability must be if they cause an accident.
Ah, because a massive corporation actually has the financial capacity to absorb that risk and compensate victims, whereas a local community just does not.
Precisely. So the legal argument against the SHANTI Act is that artificially lowering the liability threshold just to attract foreign capital, it directly violates that established constitutional principle.
It shifts the catastrophic risk from the foreign corporation right onto the Indian citizen.
Yes. So you have the state navigating this complex doctrine of proportionality on two entirely different fronts.
Protecting individual liberty against state detention in the UAPA cases, and protecting collective populations against corporate negligence in the nuclear sector. But, this tension between state mandates and competing claims, it isn't just a modern issue.
No, definitely not.
I was looking at the Bhojshala-Kamal Maula complex dispute in Dar, Madhya Pradesh, and it seems like we are retroactively litigating centuries of history right now.
We are. The High Court recently ruled that the complex had historically been a Hindu temple, suggesting the Muslim side seek alternative land. And what is crucial for our analysis here is the judicial reasoning they used.
Right.
The court relied heavily on an Archaeological Survey of India report, an ASI survey, and they leaned on the principles from the 2019 Ayodhya judgment, specifically this concept of preponderance of probability.
Wait, preponderance of probability, does that just mean whoever has 51% of the evidence wins?
Yeah.
How does a court practically apply that standard to centuries of shifting history?
It is the standard used in civil title suits, as opposed to the beyond a reasonable doubt standard you see in criminal law.
Okay.
In civil disputes, the court essentially places the evidence from both sides on a scale. Whichever side tips the scale even slightly establishes that preponderance of probability.
I see.
And here, the court validated the ASI's archaeological findings as the heavier weight on that scale, while also factoring in the ongoing faith and belief of the practitioners.
But wait, doesn't this run straight into the Places of Worship Act of 1991? Because wasn't that law specifically designed to freeze the religious character of all places of worship exactly as they stood on August 15, 1947?
Yes, that was the intent.
So how is a civil suit altering the status of this site even moving forward?
Well, this brings up an important point about legal mechanics. The 1991 Act is not absolute. This litigation is navigating through a very specific legal loophole, Section 4.3 of the 1991 Act.
What does that section do?
It explicitly exempts ancient and historical monuments that are governed by the 1958 Monuments Act. So if a structure is classified as an archaeological monument by the ASI, that 1947 freeze date just does not apply in the same way.
It is absolutely vital that we look at this impartially today, because on one side, you have a formal judicial process meticulously weighing archaeological evidence to resolve a historical grievance.
Right.
But on the flip side, minority groups and legal scholars have expressed profound concerns. Like, an editorial in The Hindu warned that repeatedly utilizing these loopholes, which we are also seeing with Gamvapi and Shahi Igga, it effectively hollows out the protective spirit of the 1991 Act.
Yeah, the concern raised there is that adversarial litigation in these spaces risks introducing majoritarian bounds. It makes it incredibly difficult for courts to remain entirely neutral adjudicators over time.
And the editorial pointed out that since 2003, there had been an arrangement for shared democratic coexistence at Bhojshala. Both communities use the complex on different days.
And for many, that shared use represents a much healthier constitutional model than constantly litigating who owned the site first.
Exactly. So domestic consolidation, whether through tightening internal security laws or resolving these ancient historical disputes, it ultimately dictates how a nation projects its power abroad.
A country at odds with itself struggles to project strength, yeah.
Right. But India is acting with incredible diplomatic confidence right now. We are seeing a massive, multi-directional foreign policy rollout. Let's start up in the north. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently wrapped up the third India-Nordic summit in Oslo.
meeting with leaders from Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden.
Yeah.
And this summit, it's a masterclass in a geopolitical hedging game. India is essentially buying diplomatic insurance policies from multiple competing brokers at the exact same time.
And the Nordics are vital for India's role in the Arctic Council, right?
Hmm?
India has been an observer there since 2013, doing critical climate and glaciology research.
They have. But the summit wasn't just about melting ice caps. It really highlighted the friction between Western expectations and India's demand for strategic autonomy.
Oh, definitely. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store publicly pushed for India to use its influence with Russia to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine.
Yet, even while pushing for tighter sanctions on Moscow, Storr had to concede to India's stark macroeconomic reality. He openly acknowledged that India is a massive nation with insatiable energy needs.
Because Russian oil makes up so much of our imports now.
Exactly. To put it in perspective for you, before the Ukraine conflict, Russian crude oil accounted for less than 1% of India's imports. Today, it is a staggering 40%.
40%, that's a massive jump.
It is. And Norway, being a major energy exporter itself, they understand the raw mechanics of global energy markets. They recognize that India physically cannot just abandon its primary energy supplier overnight without crippling its own economy.
And India is flat out refusing to be boxed into Western diplomatic norms. There was that moment in Oslo where a Norwegian journalist confronted the prime minister about not taking open press questions.
Oh, right.
And the External Affairs Ministry stepped right in and defended the practice by calling India a civilizational country. They firmly stated that different nations have different traditions, and India will not be graded on a purely Western rubric.
Which perfectly explains India's deepening relationship with Italy, actually.
Yes.
Well, it is a partnership built heavily on mutual strategic autonomy. Prime Minister Modi and Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni recently co-authored a joint op-ed mapping out a massive Indo-Mediterranean corridor.
Ah, the IMS corridor. They established a highly ambitious 20 billion euro bilateral trade target by 2029, didn't they?
Yes, but looking at the details, it isn't just about trading traditional goods like textiles or machinery. They are heavily focused on artificial intelligence and digital public infrastructure, DPI.
Okay, so DPI and AI, what is Italy's play here?
Well, when we connect this to the bigger picture, Italy is not just looking for a trade partner. It is looking to India to help build an AI infrastructure that entirely bypasses the US-China tech duopoly.
Oh, wow.
Italy wants to combine its advanced industrial manufacturing with India's massive digital scale. I mean, with over 100 unicorns and 200,000 startups, India possesses an entrepreneurial ecosystem that Italy desperately wants to tap into.
They want to make the Global South the new center of ethical, human-centered tech gravity. So we have Arctic research in the north, a digital Mediterranean corridor in the west, and India is simultaneously pivoting east. Because Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's just concluded some really high-stakes talks in Hanoi with Vietnam's defense minister.
General Phan Van Giang, yes. And while the Italy partnership focuses on the digital space, the Vietnam alliance is anchored in physical maritime security in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
They are significantly expanding joint military exercises. But what is truly fascinating is the overlap of these strategies. During the visit, they virtually inaugurated an AI language lab at the Air Force Officers College in Vietnam.
An AI lab for the military.
Yeah, and they signed agreements for quantum technology cooperation with their telecommunications university. So AI is no longer just an economic tool. It has become a core diplomatic export for India.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Why should they care about a strait thousands of miles away or an AI lab in Hanoi?
Well, if you were sitting at home wondering why a maritime agreement with Vietnam or an AI corridor with Italy matters to your daily life, look no further than your wallet. Because all of this ambitious diplomacy, all of this global trade, relies entirely on a few incredibly vulnerable stretches of water.
The physical infrastructure of globalization.
Precisely. We tend to think of the oceans as vast, limitless expanses. But strategic planners view the Indian Ocean as a closed ocean.
What does that mean, a closed ocean?
Unlike the Atlantic or the Pacific, which are just wide open fields, entering or exiting the Indian Ocean requires passing through very narrow, easily blocked doors.
And the volume moving through these doors is just staggering. Roughly 30% of all global container traffic and 80% of the world's seaborne oil trade passes through here.
It's massive.
We are looking at 3 specific choke points that essentially hold the global economy hostage. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz.
The primary gateway to the Persian Gulf.
Right. 1/5 of the entire planet's oil and liquefied natural gas supplies squeeze through that gate. And the geopolitical temperature there is rising fast because Iran is currently formalizing a toll system.
Yeah, establishing a new body called the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. They're effectively attempting to tax the world's energy supply simply for passing their shores.
Crazy to think about. And then you move to Bab-el-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears.
A very fitting name lately.
Seriously, this is the vital artery connecting the Red Sea and the Suez Canal to the Gulf of Aden. It handles nearly 10% of global crude oil. But since late 2023, militant Houthi attacks have turned this strait into an active war zone, drastically disrupting commercial traffic.
And finally, on the eastern flank, we have the Strait of Malacca, historically known as the Gooseberry Strait. This is the primary link between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea.
And it is tiny. At its narrowest point, it is only 2.8 kilometers wide.
Barely enough room for ships to pass safely.
Yet 24% of all global maritime trade, 45% of global oil shipments, and 26% of all internationally traded cars bottleneck through this tiny channel.
And think about China's position here. They rely on the Malacca Strait for 75% of their total oil imports.
75%.
It is such a massive strategic vulnerability that military planners literally call it the Malacca Dilemma. If a rival navy blockades that 2.8-kilometer stretch, China's economy grinds to a halt in weeks.
And the big problem with these choke points is that there are no easy workarounds.
Right.
Let's look at the systemic linkages, which is crucial for UPSC General Studies Paper 3 on the economy. Because of the violence near Bab-el-Mandeb, massive cargo ships are refusing to enter the Red Sea.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, they're being forced to avoid the Suez Canal entirely and sail all the way south, around the Cape of Good Hope at the tip of Africa.
And that detour adds 10 to 14 days to a single voyage. Plus, it burns an extra $2 million in fuel and operational costs per trip.
It's a logistical nightmare.
And this is exactly where geopolitical theory crashes into your monthly budget, cause and effect. We just saw government-owned oil marketing companies hike petrol and diesel prices by 90 paise per liter. And that was the second increase in just 5 days.
The landed cost of imports is soaring. Crude oil is stubbornly staying above $100 a barrel, and the Indian rupee is weakening under the pressure. The oil companies simply cannot absorb those losses indefinitely.
So they pass the cost down the supply chain directly to the consumer. But it isn't just petrol. Consider the logistics of your cooking gas, LPG.
Oh, the Krapler data on this is terrifying.
It is. In March, 4.5 lakh tons of LPG shipments left the United States bound for India. But for the first half of May, that number plummeted to just 1.67 lakh tons.
That is a massive drop. And why the sudden drop? Because the route from the U.S. to India is incredibly long now. When you force those ships to divert entirely around Africa, a single round trip suddenly takes up to 90 days.
Compared to a quick 10 to 20-day sprint from the Persian Gulf.
Right. India physically does not have enough ships in its domestic fleet to maintain a conveyor belt of that length.
So we're stuck relying on foreign vessels and highly volatile, expensive spot cargoes just to keep kitchens running. And this macroeconomic squeeze, it's devastating agriculture too.
Yeah, the fertilizer issue.
Union Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan recently admitted that global supply constraints, driven entirely by the West Asia crisis, have triggered a massive fertilizer crunch. The government is currently scrambling, reaching out to 28 different countries.
28 countries. Just trying to procure fertilizer at whatever premium they can so farmers don't lose a season.
And this level of macro volatility is forcing massive global corporations into highly defensive postures. Look at the banking sector. Standard Chartered just announced they are cutting 7,000 corporate jobs globally by 2030.
Wow.
And they aren't doing this because they are failing today. They are doing it to free up capital to aggressively invest in AI and automation.
Yeah.
They are trimming the fat to survive what they project will be a much tougher, more volatile global economic climate.
We're seeing major corporate recalibrations across the board. In a slightly different vein, the U.S. Department of Justice just officially dropped all wire fraud and securities fraud conspiracy charges against the Adani Group.
Interesting timing.
Yeah, when the geopolitical weather gets this rough, both nations and corporations scrambled to secure their footing and resolve outstanding liabilities. But we must remember that economic recessions and fuel hikes are really only part of the fallout.
What do you mean?
Well, when geopolitical stability collapses, global health security is often the most immediate casualty.
Oh, right. That is a grim reality currently unfolding in Central Africa. The World Health Organization has just declared an emergency over a rare variant of the Ebola disease.
The Bundibugyo virus variant.
Yes, in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
And you simply cannot separate this health emergency from the political violence on the ground there. The eastern provinces of the DRC, specifically North Kivu, have been functionally cut in half by intense fighting between the Congolese National Army and M23 rebels.
And the logistics of fighting a highly infectious disease require speed and open corridors. But the Goma airport, which is the absolute critical hub for funneling humanitarian and medical aid into the region, has been completely shut down.
Because the rebels laid siege to the city.
Exactly. The political conflict is literally bottlenecking the medical response. It stops the delivery of protective gear and vaccines.
Which allows a deadly viral outbreak to mutate from a localized cluster into a full-blown global health emergency. It perfectly illustrates the fragility of our interconnected systems. A political breakdown leads to a logistical shutdown, which triggers a biological crisis.
It really is all connected. Okay. Let's take a breath and recap the massive ground we've covered today.
Good idea.
We started deep in the mechanics of India's constitutional law, watching the Supreme Court wrestle with the doctrine of proportionality under Article 21. We saw the tension of balancing individual liberty against state security in the UAPA cases.
And weighing citizen safety against foreign capital in the Nuclear Shanti Act.
Right. We then explored how those same tensions apply to resolving historical disputes at the Bhojshala complex, balancing archaeological evidence against the vital need for democratic coexistence.
And from that domestic foundation, we zoomed out to the global chessboard. We saw India projecting unprecedented confidence, securing vital energy ties, while partnering with the Nordics on Arctic research.
Building a massive digital AI corridor with Italy to bypass tech monopolies, and reinforcing physical maritime security with Vietnam.
All of which, as we discovered, remains utterly dependent on those fragile geographic choke points: Hormuz, Bab-el-Mandeb, and Malacca.
We traced the physical logistics of how a missile strike at the Gate of Tears forces a ship around the entire continent of Africa, creating a vessel shortage that drops our LPG imports.
Which ultimately hikes the price of your daily fuel and triggers a nationwide fertilizer crunch.
And finally, we saw the human cost of instability, where a regional rebel conflict in the DRC directly fuels a global Ebola emergency by cutting off physical access to aid.
Today, we explored how heavily nations rely on specific legal frameworks and narrow maritime choke points to maintain global order. But as technology like AI and local renewable energy grids advance, we have to ask, are we moving toward a future where these ancient physical trade routes matter less, or will geography always dictate our destiny?
That is a brilliant question to end on, and definitely something to chew on for your exam prep. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember to check the description box for today's notes and keep leaving us your feedback. Until next time, stay curious.